If you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. People need to know that coming here illegally on a boat will not lead them to a life in the United Kingdom.
The government's message of deterrence is echoing round the migrant camps of Dunkirk, literally.
That if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum. You can't benefit from our modern slavery protections. You can't make spurious human rights claims. And you can't stay.
People, along with everyone else, who are trying to process exactly what this means, not just for British politics or international law, but for them. A couple of months ago in this camp, we met Naweed Azizi, a 25-year-old English teacher from Afghanistan. Naveed, if every country that you go to doesn't want you, why do you keep going?
From childhood, it was my one big dream that is one of my big wishes that one day I will go to UK.
A few days after we interviewed him, he crossed the channel on a small boat and claimed asylum. Now one of the 40,000 plus asylum seekers being accommodated in hotels at a cost of around £6 million a day. Although grateful for the assistance he's receiving, his mental health is deteriorating. His reaction to yesterday's legislation will be music to the government's ears.
So maybe 50% if I aware on that time, I would choose another way, another country for my asylum. And I had told you in that interview that we had in Dunkirk that it was one of my goal and wish that one day I will come to UK. Beside my wishes and my goal, I choose UK for my friends and relatives.
In other words, Naweed is still desperate to stay in Britain. The Home Secretary said in an interview this morning that she was expecting about 40,000 people to try to get across to the UK on little dinghies again this year. The question now for the government is this: what constitutes success when it comes to the small boats policy? How many people do they have to detain and deport for them to be able to come to the electorate before a general election and say this was a success? In order to detain the numbers needed, the government would have to increase the capacity of detention centres by up to 10 times, according to some estimates. In order to deport the numbers needed, they'll need many more bilateral agreements with countries willing to take people back. If this week was about sending a message to these men and the British electorate, the months to come will be about management on a monumental scale.
Paraic O'Brien, well, back here, the immigration debate was the main topic at Prime Minister's Questions. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, joins us from Parliament now. Gary.
Well, amid that blizzard of pledges, missions, targets that came from the two main party leaders at the beginning of this year, one that has definitely cut through to voters more than the others, all the evidence suggests to us, is stop the boats. And that's not a particular surprise, because it was focus grouped to death before it was launched. And today, what we saw, the day after the policy that goes with that slogan was announced in the House of Commons, what we saw today was Rishi Sunak deploying the slogan and the policy fully weaponized against the opposition leader. And he did it in classic culture wars, wedge issue style, by trying to lash the opposition leader, Keir Starmer himself, to the thing that what the Tory evidence suggests from their focus groups and polling, so many floating voters feel strongly about stopping the boats. Here's our flavour of the exchanges that happened at Prime Minister's Questions.
On this matter, he talked about his legal background. He's just another lefty lawyer standing in our way.
This is their 5th Prime Minister, their 6th immigration plan, their 7th Home Secretary, and after all this time, all they offer is the same old gimmicks and empty promises.
We are delivering what we said, and it's crystal clear, listening to this, Mr. Speaker, that it's going to be the Conservatives and only the Conservatives that stop the boats.
I mean, it's not just Keir Starmer who the Tories have been accusing of blocking previous efforts and current ones to stop illegal immigration. In an email that went out in the name of Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, yesterday to Tory members, there was an accusation that civil servants were blocking attempts to control illegal immigration in the past. The quote from the letter actually talked about an activist blob of left-wing lawyers, civil servants and the Labour Party who were to blame for all that. Well, senior civil servants were livid about that. The email has been withdrawn. The explanation that's come out of Number 10 is that the ghostwriter inside a Conservative Central Office who drafts these things that go out to people's inboxes in the name of ministers, Prime Minister and the rest of it, that person hadn't got clearance. Suella Braverman herself hadn't seen the email. Well, I understand people very close to Suella Braverman had, and probably thought that the ghostwriter in Central Office had rather captured her voice rather well. But what's happened now is that it's been withdrawn. No apology from the government, but a statement went out to Suella Braverman, to Home Office civil servants today, saying how much she thanked them. A huge thank you. She hopes that draws a line under it.
Thanks, Gary. Well, earlier I spoke to the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, and I put it to him that if the government don't stop the boats, they are the ones who should be removed.
The public were rightly very concerned and frustrated by what they're seeing. They want the government to take action. That's why we've made it one of our 5 key promises to the British public.
Do you agree that you should be removed if you fail to stop the boats?
Well, I think the public will make their own judgment at the next general election.
If a court finds that you are in fact in breach of international law and the UNHCR says you're breaking the Refugee Convention, what happens then? Would you leave both the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention?
Well, we don't expect that to happen. We are confident that we have...
Well, you accept it's possible, don't you? Because that's what it says on the bill.
Well, we're confident that we've got strong legal arguments. They are, in some cases, new and novel legal arguments. I don't think that should surprise anyone.
So the court might rule against you, mightn't they? That's the point of this warning.
Well,
it may be legal, it may not be, and that's going to be tested.
It's possible. These are new legal principles, but they're likely to be upheld by the courts.
So if you lose, a lot of your own colleagues are saying you need to leave the European Convention. Suella Braverman believes in leaving the European Convention. Is that the next step? Because a lot of people think you're gearing up to fight the next election on we'll pull out of the European Convention, Labour won't.
No, we don't think that's necessary. We want to remain within the European Convention to respect our international law obligations.
Can you explain why you're saying that somebody who may have been trafficked by criminal gangs onto a boat to arrive in Britain will no longer be able to tell the authorities here that they have been trafficked and claim the entitlements of modern slavery legislation? Well, you're going to deport them, aren't you?
Well, that's not quite right. What will happen is if you come here directly from a place of danger, then you can claim asylum in accordance with
my example of someone who's been trafficked against their will.
Your example is of someone who has come through a succession of safe countries, has almost certainly left France.
I'm talking about someone who's been trafficked against their will. You are now saying that they can no longer tell the police here that they are a victim of modern slavery and apply for asylum.
No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that when they arrive in the UK, if they've come via a safe country like France, then they can make those claims and appeals, but they'll be non-suspensive, which means that they will either be returned home if it's safe to do so, and countries like Albania, which we believe are safe, have specific arrangements in place.
So you would
to support victims
of modern slavery?
We're not talking about deporting people, we're talking about
removing them, sending them somewhere else.
That's safely to their home country, or to a safe country like Rwanda, where they will be cared for with proper arrangements put in place. And at that point, they can put in their appeals, for example, on modern slavery.
Somebody in Iran fears for their lives, they're being persecuted. People have been killed in Iran by what I'm sure you'll agree is a repressive regime. How do they find a safe and legal route to claim asylum in Britain?
Well, today there's a number of safe and legal routes that we operate. We have resettlement schemes.
But you have to claim asylum somewhere else for the resettlement scheme first. You can't just apply from Iran.
You can. We have schemes, for example, a community resettlement scheme, and we have a broader resettlement scheme where we work with the United Nations and
the UN scheme requires you to claim asylum somewhere else and then be resettled.
Well, you have to make contact with the UNHCR, which I think is an understandable check. We're the world's 4th largest recipient of individuals under the UNHCR scheme. Since 2015, 450,000 people have come to the UK under our humanitarian schemes from places like Ukraine, Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan.
No, that's the point. If you're Ukrainian, you get a visa, you get welcomed at the airport, you get a house, from a minister, in your case. If you're Iranian, chances are you'll be deported.
No. Well, firstly, I do think it's right that the UK prioritises its finite resources on those countries to which we feel we have the greatest geographic or moral or historical
Well, that's interesting. So
obligation.
Ukrainians are more entitled than Iranians.
I don't think that the UK, or indeed any single country, can provide refuge to everyone in the world who wishes to.
So we have a greater moral duty to a Ukrainian than an Iranian, that's what you're saying?
Well, I think it's understandable that we make choices because we've got finite resources.
Isn't the truth that everybody wants to stop the boats? They're illegal, dangerous, horrific. Most people don't like the idea of illegal immigration, people who want to cheat the system. But most people are very uncomfortable with the idea of Britain turning away people who have genuinely suffered.
I think Britain is a very generous and big-hearted country, and the actions that we've taken as a country in recent years have demonstrated that. But I do think the British public are capable of making the distinction between those people who are genuinely fleeing war and persecution and human rights abuses and people who are essentially economic migrants. And I think that somebody who has arrived in a place of sanctuary, like France, with a well-functioning asylum system, and then chooses to come to the UK, is essentially becoming an economic migrant.